eating grass to live. My mother and I would crawl out of our bomb shelter and we would dig out dandelions and all sorts and vegetations that would grow around the bomb shelter, and that was the only green we had.
From age 10 to
age 17.
17.
To get some water, we would crawl to a nearby spring to get the water under snipers' bullets because we were surrounded by the Muslims and the Palestinians. My mother had to use her stocking on top of the bottle so we can drink the water, so we can catch all the rocks and all the worms and all the maggots so we can drink the water. We couldn't even wash the bottles. It was gallons. It was a yellow gallon that I remember looking inside, and it had this green algae growing in it, and we used to drink the water with the green algae and all.
Wow, what a childhood. Where did
That's
how
how we
did you
lived.
go to school? How did you...
Education was very, very important to the Christians. So for 2 years, from age 10 to 12, we did not go to school at all because the shelling was 24 hours a day. Once the Muslims and the Palestinians realized that Israel is what's keeping us alive and Israel was supporting us, they were furious and we were bombarded constantly. Now at that time, Israel didn't come physically into Lebanon. And at the same time, Syria had come into Lebanon as a peacekeeping force in 1976, a year after the war started. And Syria used Lebanon as a place to organize and shell Israel also. It was very convenient for them.
So they didn't keep the peace, they
They didn't keep the peace at all. They just bonded with the Muslims and the Palestinians, and the Christian Lebanese were fighting not only the Lebanese Muslims. The civil war had nothing to do within just the problems within Lebanon. We had Libyans fighting in Lebanon with the Muslims and the Palestinians and the Syrians against the Christians. We had people from Somalia, people from Sudan, people from Iraq. We had all the insurgents, just like what's happening today in Iraq. But our school was very important to our leaders. And after 2 years, they decided that we need to get an education. So the military with their army tanks, you know, those big tanks with the long cannons, that's what I was picked up in to go to school. So that tank, you can put in it 18 children. And the tank would go from one bomb shelter or one house to the other, pick up the children. And our school was a bomb shelter, and that's how we studied. So the 2 years, I remember from age 13 and 14, we squeezed 4 years into 2 because of the years we missed. So we did 6 months out of the year of 6th grade, let's say, and then another 6 months of 7th grade, and that's how we were able to catch up on our education.
Okay, so once again, when you were 17, something changed, and you stayed in Lebanon, or you went to...
Yes. When I was 17 years old, as Israel advanced into Lebanon when they were coming in, my mother became wounded by a Muslim shell as the Muslims were shelling us frantically, withdrawing, running into Beirut, into the camps. My mother became wounded and we had to take her to an Israeli hospital. That experience, it was a life-saving experience for my mother. It was a life-changing experience for me. Because I spent 22 days in the hospital in Israel, and those days changed my life.
Why is that? Because you had already seen that Israel was helping you, so what, were you surprised that they were nice?
I knew Israel was helping us, but I didn't have the personal relationship with Jews.
Okay.
It was that army is protecting us, and I knew Israel was good because Israel was protecting us. When my mother became wounded, we had to take her to an Israeli hospital for treatment. When we got to the border and they put my mother into an Israeli ambulance and we drove for an hour into Israel, I was alone all of a sudden in Israel with my mother who's half unconscious in the back of the ambulance. I was 17 years old, didn't know what to expect, I knew they were nice to me. The driver that drove us to the hospital treated me like his own daughter. He would explain to me what we're saying on the radio, what's happening in Lebanon. He treated me with such compassion, such love, such respect. I was so touched. He put me at ease. He can tell that I was uncertain. My mother is sick. I don't know if she's going to survive. When we got to the hospital, when I entered the emergency room, there were hundreds of people on the floor. There were Palestinian militia fighters brought in from Lebanon who were wounded in the war. There were Muslim Lebanese brought in. There were Christian Lebanese brought in. And I could not believe my eyes. I could not believe that the Israelis are treating the Muslims and the Palestinians. I can understand why they were treating me. After all, I am their friend. I'm their ally. I'm a Christian. But I could not understand why they were treating the militia, the Palestinian fighters, and the Muslim fighters. But little did I know about the Israeli culture then. The doctors treated everyone according to their injury. They did not see religion. They did not see political affiliation. They did not see nationality. They treated everyone according to their injury. The doctor treated my mother before he treated the Israeli soldier laying next to her. I could not believe my eyes.
That was simply because her condition was more
Because of her
severe.
condition was more severe. They took my mother to the fourth floor of the hospital, and we were in the room maybe 5 minutes. They put her in a room where previously that morning they had brought in 2 other ladies, Muslim ladies from Lebanon. And we were not in the room but 5 minutes, and I heard all this commotion outside our window, outside our balcony. And I remember going to the balcony and looking outside to see what was happening. And 2 Israeli helicopters had just landed, and they were taking Israeli soldiers on stretchers into the emergency room. And I remember standing there feeling sick to my stomach. I felt so humiliated. I felt so ashamed. I felt so brokenhearted. After all, these people are wounded because of the war with my country. I felt out of place. I didn't make eye contact with anyone. And suddenly I felt the tapping on my shoulder, and I looked, and there was this nurse standing next to me, and she said, "You are new here, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, they just brought in my mother to this room 5 minutes ago." And she can see the fear in my eyes. She can see the feeling of sadness, the feeling of uncertainty. And this lady put her arm around me, and she said, "Don't worry, we'll take good care of her. You'll be just fine." And I remember crying. I started crying uncontrollably because I felt such love and such compassion and such acceptance. Thank you. And I realized I was surrounded by people who had such characters and such values I wanted to adopt. I realized that in my culture, my people will not be able to show compassion towards their enemy the way the Israelis were able to show compassion to their enemy in their most trying moments. I realized I was fed a fabricated lie by my government against the Jews in Israel that was so far from reality. I spent 22 days in the hospital, and those days changed my life. Changed the way I believe information, changed the way I listen to the radio, I watch television, and it was a very important lesson in my life. And I decided these are the type of people I want to be with. These are the type of people I want to live amongst. I had to go back to Lebanon because I had to go back to take care of my parents. I'm an only child. I don't have sisters and brothers. My parents were married for 22 years. They were unable to have any children. And my mother had me, she was 55 years old, and my father was 60, and I was their only child.
Wow.
So I had to go back and take care of my elderly parents. But I vowed that one day I will be back to Israel. And that one day came 3 years later.
What were the circumstances of that?
I moved to Israel to work. I became a news anchor for World News. I had a job opportunity open up in Jerusalem, and I was able to get the job. And that's when I moved to Israel. And I lived there from 1984 to 1989. And that was an amazing experience. Living in Jerusalem is the most enriching experience anyone could ever dream of, because Jerusalem is the pinnacle between East meets West.
It's remarkable. You know, you didn't only survive, but you thrived.
Yes, I'm very thankful. I'm very fortunate.
Yeah.
I believe we make our fortune. There is no such thing as luck.
So you were in Israel from 84 to 89.
Correct.
And the whole time you were working as a news
I was
anchor.
working as a news anchor, and it was a wonderful experience because I was able to evaluate information. I was exposed to information, and I was able to evaluate information and make my own decision and come to my own conclusions based on fact, without the filters of the Arabic propaganda that Arabic society is oblivious to. I was able to meet world leaders. I was able to in my studio, before doing the news, I would be coming out of my newscast, and Mr. Perez, Shimon Perez, or Yitzhak Rabin would be sitting there getting their makeup on while I'm getting my makeup off. It was an incredible experience. Margaret Thatcher would come to town. We'll all go out to dinner at the Knesset, and I was too young to appreciate how good I had it. Now when I look back, I realize how fortunate I was.